Cool. So, hey everyone, thank you so much for joining us today for our June edition of our SRE Leaders Panel. So in our last panel, we spoke about how to overcome imposter syndrome in high tempo situations and how culture directly affects the availability of our systems. So today we're super excited to build on that last discussion on how SREs can manage systems complexity, and especially in the context of recent circumstances, how that's tightly intertwined with business health. So we'll kick off with 40 minutes of panel discussion with our guests and then leave 20 minutes at the end for open Q&A. So feel free to pop in any questions into the chat. And after the session, we'll email you all the recording of this panel as well as a transcript blog so that you can share that with your teams. So make sure again to add your questions into the Zoom Q&A so we can answer them live during that section. So now I'll go ahead and hand it off to our wonderful panel facilitator, Amy Tobey.
Hi, everyone. I'm Amy Tobey. I'm staff SRE at Blameless, and I'll be your facilitator today. Without further ado, I'm excited. I want to get to my panelists here because all three of them are people I've been seeing around the community, especially the resilience and software communities for a while now. And to get them all in the same room to talk about this stuff is really exciting to me. So I'm going to start with Jessica. If you could just give us a quick intro for yourself.
Hi, I'm Jessica Kerr. I call myself a semathicist in the medium of code, where semathicist refers to software and the teams that build it are a learning system made of learning parts. I am part of the resilience engineering and DevOps and various language communities, and software is endlessly fascinating because it is endlessly complex and only getting more interesting as we get better at it.
Great. Which language do you love best right now?
Right now, if I have a choice, I use TypeScript, and it's not that I love it the best, it's that I recognize that I need to try to be actually good at one of them.
Oh, I like that, yeah.
Instead of doing all of them, but I also write Ruby and Java these days.
Great, thank you. And let's go to Tim next.
I'm Tim Tischler. I'm a site reliability champion at New Relic. I'm also in the master's program at Lund in human factors and system safety. And I have been, most of my career as an individual contributor has been on the ops side of things, ops, then DevOps, then SRE. And I've also, the other half of my career has been more management of product-focused front-end efforts and front-end UI teams and things of that nature. So I've kind of gone back and forth between the two tracks in my career. And yeah, when I first found Redeploy and a lot of the system safety resilience engineering stuff a few years ago, I couldn't stop reading it, and I've been doing that ever since.
Mm-hmm. What would you say is the root cause of resilience in your life?
Oh dear.
You could tell me to shut up. Well, let's go to Tim. You want to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Or Ward.
I'm sorry, Ward, yes.
Well, most of what I know about our resilience, I learned from Tim. And that was maybe 2 years ago now, 3. We were at a company offsite, and he hands me this brown book, and he said, "This is what I am studying." Second read, I read it and kind of recognized then the transition that computing had gone through. I've been through transitions before. Probably the most influential on me is when desktop computing became a thing. And before that, computers were in big rooms and they had staff that could take 18 months to write a program, and that wasn't working in the desktop. The other thing is that people had a lot of expectations that they couldn't quite articulate. So this whole agile software thing grew up around getting a team close to somebody who needed the software, which in my variation of that, we called the customer, because we were getting paid because they wanted us to deliver software. But it was really more of a partnership with the division of responsibilities, and they weren't required to know exactly what they want in the beginning. So that became Agile. I think it's played out pretty well. A lot of people ask me if I had it to do all over again, would I do it differently? And well, I might color balance the picture a little better, but no, it's as right as it's ever been, and will continue to be right in the same way that Newton's laws are right and worth studying, and Newton gets credit for them. But there's a lot more going on in the world now, and I think that's really the subject today that'll be fun to get into.
Yeah, coming back to you, you mentioned transitions and brought up your role in the Agile movement.
Yeah.
But let's back up a little, and I want each of you to go. I'm going to go around and talk about something a transition that's happened in software, but maybe pick like a horizontal thing. So mine is game development. I'm not a game developer, I'm an SRE, but I've been watching it since I was a kid and was fascinated with them, and kind of broke into my career via games. When I was a kid and there was Atari, those games were developed by hardware engineers a lot of times who knew assembly or how to actually just build the chips for the cartridges and so on. And the complexity there was largely in the EE space, right? Electrical engineering. And now we're into these millions and millions of line code bases to bring up a simple 2D game. And I think about that a lot in terms of just how complexity is developed in that space over the last 20 years I've been around, or 40 years now for me. I've been around it. And what's yours? And let's start with Jessica.
I think of it in the way that software interacts with people so much more closely. So Ward, as you were describing that transition, I was thinking about how when the computers were far away and they were in a room, and you just didn't have the same expectations that you did when the computer's right in front of you. And you can interact with it much more closely. And now our computers come around with our hands. And so the human computer systems are a lot more intertwined, more and more. And these expectations that we can't articulate, even if we could, they'd immediately be wrong as soon as you deploy the software, because the software, it's not just clicking into an existing system and automating something that used to be paperwork. It's changing that system. And it's changing the people that use it. And so it's immediately wrong because it's got to evolve and grow inside the system that it's now part of.
A moving platform trying to hit a moving target. Or a lot of moving targets.
We're creating the target at the same time that we're aiming for it.
How about you next, Ward?
Well, I think what's most interesting is how hard you have to work to understand what's going on. In our mathematical phase, either you could write the proof or you couldn't. In the Agile phase, you had the test, so you didn't. And now we're not sure how we tell what's going on. It's evolving very rapidly, and a lot of it has to do with making sense of every surprise, I think, is the terminology that attracts my attention. And I will say that I have this habit, I'd go to conferences and people would tell me about their Agile project, and they're telling me about all the Agile practices that they applied. And it's like, I've heard that stuff before. When it's kind of boring. So I'd say, well, what did you learn that you didn't expect to learn? Ooh. And then they'd say, yeah, that's a good question. And then something comes to mind that's fabulous. And instead of telling me how to do Agile, they tell me amazing things. Good storytelling, and they're all personal, and that was neat. So what did you learn that you didn't expect to learn? As a power question.
For illuminating kind of that story of how things have changed over the years, even. I like that.
Oh, for sure. Well, it takes longer to tell the stories. That's for sure.
For sure. How about you, Tim?
to go along with your talking about game development, it's interesting, like the same thing. Once upon a time, writing a game, you write a game for one user, you know, it was a single person game, not on a network. And it was one person writing it on a computer and iterating. And then after that, we got to teams of people working on an application that had a couple of moving parts that were, and the end users of that were expected to be a small team in an office using a thing after it had been deployed. And then after that, we got to teams of teams working on systems that were moving so fast that then opened up to the entire internet. So not only are your users just your users, they're also the hackers, they're also the criminals, they're also the bots, they're also like just this huge giant world out there. And knowing where the bounds of your system is, or who's using your system, or to what ends they're using it, is completely impossible, just totally impossible. And so it's gone from looking downward into the complexity of the hardware, going, okay, I have a mental model of how this works, but tomorrow my mental model of my hardware will be the same because the hardware is the same, to where like I have no idea where the bounds of the system are. And whatever we think we know of today won't be the same because it will change tomorrow and the next day, and it's never-ending change. It's an ocean of change and of contexts as far out as we can imagine.
That is sort of a symbol of the success of information technology, really. That it has become so important. It's not a curiosity anymore, and I'm not sure we were fully prepared for that. It's like we wouldn't want to hope for less, really.
So I sense the theme about like being unable to sense the boundaries of our systems, but we still have this thing that we do in our daily work that we get paid to do this, where we have to define boundaries, right? It's a big part of our work as software engineers. And so before we started the show, we were having a quick discussion about like what we wanted to talk about. And one of the things that came up was how testing today maybe isn't living up to the expectations people have in terms of defining the boundaries of our systems or protecting those boundaries. And I wanted to get y'all's thoughts on, to carry that a little bit further on, how does testing, in your view, help define those boundaries, and how do we start to create more confidence in these huge complex systems where we all four of us, when we talk about this, kind of have to go out into very big, broad, sweeping terms and talk about very abstract things to even grapple at this problem. But we can start with testing as kind of one of these tools that we have in our toolbox that we use to come at this problem. So how do you see testing going in the next 5 years, let's say, in terms of dealing with this complexity and making systems more predictable? Let's start with Tim this time.
Something that's been nagging at me for about a decade now that is coming more into view. I asked, I don't know, 2010 or 11, what's the difference between testing and monitoring? And ops people would go, what? They're different. And QA folks would go, what? They're different. And Java developers would go, testing, monitoring, what's that? But I think it's gone from like unit tests are good, necessary, and proper, and an important part of it. But the testing pipeline, I think, just needs to keep extending out further and further into the living, breathing, chaotic, complex, moving system, and knowing that our expectations of the moving system are being met. It started out, is the expectation of my little piece of code being met? Then we said, okay, are the expectations of these things chained together being met? And we had integration tests. And then at some point, people started going, wow, it's really hard to capture the right data in my integration tests and know that we're getting it. So let's move out into the production landscape. And then with chaos engineering and traffic shaping and canary deploys and SLOs and all of that, really, isn't that just a kind of more three-dimensional extension or multi-dimensional extension of the ideas that were originally in tests? But it's hard to test in isolation of a living, of a actual working system. It has to be inside the system.
Yeah, it's almost, what is it? Empirical versus, I always drop these terms. but we have to measure, we're measuring out with so little certainty that we're trying to validate hypotheses that have so many angles on them.
Yep.
That we can't really reach certainty.
We couldn't build these systems if we couldn't test our code in isolation. And I think that system designers accept some responsibility for designing the test automation as just part of their job, and there's a lot of creativity there has allowed us to build systems that work well enough that we, so that's another case where testing as it was envisioned, a decade ago is still valuable. But, Tim just ticked off 4 or 5 things that we've got to do on top of all that if we really want to, to wield what we've built, to make it do what we want. And I think that it's easy to have a system kind of get out of control to maybe where you're afraid to touch it, would be a sign that you can't wield it. And so keeping that handle there is, I think, it's a new thing. It's more, well, Jessica was describing the interaction with the people and the systems and all that the computer, it's all woven together and it becomes more like sociology than mathematics.
You want to expand on that?
Oh, I'm going to wait for Jessica.
I was trying to hand it to Jessica.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So Ward mentioned early on that one reason Agile started was these expectations that we can't quite articulate. And there's like scales at which you can and levels that you can articulate your expectations. So you can get a subsystem that you understand sufficiently and you understand the hardware and its demands are stable enough that you can do mathematical proofs on it. And that's awesome because that's how you know it's going to meet your expectations because you can articulate them, which is so hard. Yeah. And then you get into tests where I can articulate some of my expectations. I'll just start with those. And then the part you're missing is everything else the system might do. So then you get into checks like property-based testing, where you're like, okay, well, what if I throw everything else that I think is valid? And then you get into security checks. And those are all the other things why would any human do that? Well, because they're not a human, they're a bot or an attacker with a tool. And so it's hard to define everything you won't do. But at the same time, we're going to, as we go to wider and wider scales and recognize that there are way more possibilities than we could ever check. I'm never going to check all the possible cross-site scripting attacks. You move from checking expectations to looking for surprise. So when you get into chaos engineering or when you're talking about observability, like the honeycomb type, you're looking for surprises. And then can you give yourself the tools to make sense of those? And then I like Ward's term for wielding the system by being able to make sense of that and then like changing the flow. change how that system looks to that particular IP address, for instance.
So that brings observability and chaos in line. The other one that I was thinking of as you were talking was red teams, kind of working out in that space of trying to find, maybe not define boundaries, but find where they actually are, which is another part of what chaos engineering does. I don't know if any of us have any deep experience with red teamers. I just know a few. So
What is red team?
Well,
red team is like when is kind of there's the old terminology of, you know, the white hat, black hat hacker, which has its own problems in the etymological space. But this new term got invented for the red teamer, which is basically people inside your own organization that test your perimeter on a regular basis, right? So they might do things like social attacks or technical attacks against the front door.
Find out what's possible.
Yeah, and just figure out, like, just keep coming at it and build resilience by a constant attack is one of the, I mean, every red team's a little different, but that's the basic gist of it.
And you know, this boundary thing is because when they actually find a way in, you know, engineers will say, well, I didn't think that was my problem.
But that's great, right? Because they've discovered a surprise. Yeah. And now we get to react to it.
Yep.
So Tim, I've hacked into your system, and now as a red teamer, and you've gotten this news as a incident investigator. But what kind of questions are you starting to ask?
So first, it's understanding what you did and how you knew to do it, and understanding the mindset that you were in of how did you know that this was a thing to attack, and how did you know that it was successful, and to be able to better understand the mindset of the people who are making the attacks. And then it leads into, so socio-technical is the best word for this era of all of this. And I don't think socio-technical system can be said enough. So socio-technical. Then in asking questions, to whom are you asking the questions, or asking the questions of? Is it the people or the systems? So here it goes to observability. How can we see that attack? How can we see what it was that happened? Are there dark spots in our observability, or hopefully as we push observability out of the boundaries of just code into the networking layer and into the firewalls and into the databases and like everywhere, then ask the question of the technical system, can you show me this attack all the way through and how it worked? Because if you can't see it, it's really hard to reason about it and to search for it and to explore the space. And so I think there are asking questions of the humans, and there are asking questions of the technology. And you need both of them to understand the context of things like this.
What do you do once you understand that context?
It depends what the context is and the expertise of the folks in the context.
Well, I think one of the things that we do as incident investigators, right, is try to take what we figure out there and re-export it back into our organization, into the technical systems and into the people. So can you talk a little about how you do that, Tim?
That's the biggest challenge, is how do you do that? Because I like Nora Bateson's idea of warm data, of like, we love metrics, we love MTTR, we love SLA, or we love severities, we love all of those nice clean metrics that executives can look at on reports and think that they know something, and they do. There is value in those, but it's so important to know the context, that we pull data out of a context, turn it into a metric, but how do we export that context out learn something, and then put it back in the context. And so like one of the huge challenges is if you see one of these, a vulnerability, or you see something, a remediation, maybe it was like Jessica was saying, there's so many ways things could fail. And well, this only failed once and it's going to take 3 weeks to fix. Do we fix it? Or was that really just a crazy 1 in a billion, these 8 things came together to cause this and this is going to be expensive to fix, versus little small ones, and you can see this one contributing factor showing up again and again in lots of little tiny small incidents. Well, let's go fix that one because that's the thing, that's one of the roots in all of these incidents. Let's go fix that. But in order to be able to have the vision to and the knowledge to see those really involves knowing the context and the work is done and the details of enough of these incidents so that a human can generalize it and go, aha, look what I found across all of these. And what I find is that those things don't show up in written retrospective summaries very often. That it was that like you really need to do a deeper analysis in order to find that this certain restart storm always involves Ruby and always involves a particular version of Rails. Aha! But once you find it and you can see that it's across a bunch of incidents, then you learn.
I hear what you're saying. So you're talking about like we can look at these kind of macro scale things happening, and then we need to reason back to the lower level things that are contributing to it, and maybe dial in on the highest value stuff to work on. And Jessica mentioned a word before you started talking that I think is really relevant, which is narrative. In basically the way of communicating across people how to do that. And I know Ward has done some work in this space with retrospectives and narratives. So I wonder if you could maybe reflect a little bit of what Tim was saying from that perspective.
Well, yeah, I think that one of the challenges we have is because our systems are bigger, that we have more people with their fingers in there. And we organize them as teams and we expect them to help each other. But you know, you learn something over here and it's very hard to communicate it over here because there's no context for even understanding the problem. And, you know, you can't help but become more specialized. You're specialized in what your programming language is and so forth. You're also specialized in, oh, I understand these 3 subsystems and the way they interact in real time. And some of that knowledge, and this is an area where I think there's a lot of opportunity is you know, if you learn something, there's this feeling, well, you ought to write it down and share it. But what you learn when you read something or when somebody explains something to you is a little different than when you pushed here and something happened and you pushed here, you know, this taking an action and operationally seeing the result of that, and especially if the system doesn't break too quickly, you can push on it and see how it behaves. And this is something that when we get afraid of our system, oh, don't do that. Whatever you do, don't do that. In fact, we used to say in the early days of Agile, you know, take the thing you fear the most and do more of it. And back then we distributed software on little diskettes, and building the installer was the thing you did at the end of the project. And if you waited till the end of the project, it was going to be a nightmare. But if you just wrote, you know, one subroutine and delivered that on an installer, it was kind of pointless. You know, somebody, your customer installs and it says, your application will appear here someday.
I mean, that's very familiar from
habit
DevOps.
of making, and then for the entire project, you're practicing every week making another installer, and that, you know, but that activity is what creates the opportunity to learn. And so having a chance for people to reach into the system and feel it work at all of the ways it works. You know,
So that kind of visceral experience, like actually being there
yeah.
active in the system.
That's right. And this is what this, you know, when I hear observability, you say, well, I want to be able to look over here, I want to touch it, and I want to see what happens. And if it gets rolled up into some, you know, throughput statistic, you can poke in a lot of places and the throughput doesn't change. But there could be something very important changing, and it's going to help you solve a problem someday.
That acting and learning thing. So I've been reading a couple papers on like inactive ecology, I think, about how humans, not just humans, animals, I mean, we learn in order to act, to make a decision on our next actions. And sometimes we act in order to learn. So like acting and learning are naturally entwined in our brains. So like I find I can't like get a good understanding of code unless I'm changing it. Even if I throw that refactor away, I need to get my fingers in it. Yeah, the changing and learning, changing a system and learning the system are like the same activity.
You get a more comprehensive mental model of what's possible. You know, like I like to savor my error messages. You know, I'll write something stupid, you know, without even trying. And I get these crazy error messages and I think, oh, I wonder why the system said that. You know, and then, you know, late at night sometime when I'm trying to finish something, I get that error message. I say, oh, I know what that means. It doesn't mean what it says. You know,
I know who wrote that.
So that kind of breadth of knowledge, and you know, in education, they talk about constructivist education, where you do projects and you do projects aligned with your interest and your curiosity, and you learn a lot that way. You know, it's common in private schools, you know, because it takes a lot
Montessori is big on it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And of course, that thread goes way back and happened to drift into the learning research group at Xerox, who built Smalltalk, and so much of my career has been imprinted on Smalltalk, and so I was learning that stuff and I didn't even know it.
Right.
You know? But yeah, you know, you got this mouse and you poke things, and you know, whatever you poke. But that system was wonderful. If you wanted to know how to do something, you just did it and hit interrupt real quick, and then it gave you a little trace and it told you how to do it. You know, it was magical.
I could take a second to glow about my son, because I watch him do this all day. Him and his friends get on Skype and play Minecraft all day. And they do exactly that. They build little machines with branches and ifs and ors and stuff all through it. These huge levels with like resets and stuff and like templates that they can copy around. And I'm watching him pick this up. I'm not teaching him a darn thing. Right? Yeah. I'm working. I'm a single parent. Like he's just sitting there, just poking at the system, trying commands, and just working his way toward his goal. It's really cool.
And well, let's talk about a team, a group of people who own some part of the system and need to improve it. There is this tendency to say, well, I'll do whatever you want me to do, boss. and then you're giving up that opportunity to know your system better. I mean, you might know your boss better in that process. But then, you know, the bureaucracy forming, your boss has a boss, it turns out, and this stuff floats down from crazy places. And you know, I know there's a recognized trade-off between, well, I know I read it in a book that Tim gave me, you know, but
I think you're edging up on like the control, like the fallacy of control. Yes. Over like social systems.
Right, and omniscience and the adaptability or capacity.
Adaptive capacity. Yeah.
Adaptive capacity is the word that I'm looking for. and how do you build adaptive capacity? You know, so reading the error messages that you foolishly created, you know, gives you a little bit. But that's kind of in a small world. That worked when there was one program that ran one computer. You know, now the adaptive capacity is at a systemic level that, you know, you would pretty soon call it alive.
I'm obsessive
I
about
already
those.
do. Go ahead, Jessica.
Oh, yeah, totally. Those error messages, whenever I see an error message that confuses me, I just have to stop and get a better error message in there, right there.
Yeah. Yeah, once you've worked a few late night calls trying to debug software under pressure, and I've noticed that engineers tend to become a lot more picky about log messages each time they work an incident and have to go and read those log messages back.
Yeah, I mean, it's like as babies, we learn how to speak by doing it.
Yeah.
Badly, even.
Exactly. We start out new exception, throw poo. Then I start getting more specific.
Oh, where do I go from that? Let's throw some toward Tim for a second because he's being quiet down there. So we nudged up against adaptive capacity and how we build it, and we've been kind of coming from this complexity. So I know you're pretty well read in this stuff, so I want you to kind of bring us a little bit closer to this intersection of how we run our organizations in these hierarchies, and just the grow. I see this kind of like this is what we've been doing for at least the industrial age. I know it's older than that, but for basically ever in human history. But we're at this point where our systems are growing to where the old models of using that hierarchy for control are preventing us from developing that adaptive capacity. Does that sound right to your reading ears or your readings?
Maybe, yes. I love Dr. Wood's paper of a theory of graceful extensibility, and I reference it and read it often. And it's amazing that within his model, he can describe software systems that are getting hammered by a denial of service attack, human teams in a software organization that are spending too much of their time being interrupt driven to be able to push things forward, and hospitals during COVID. Like one model describes all of that. And so like, it's a bunch of people's jobs, or now that we're starting to get the shape of what a resilience engineer might look like, of just going and finding where there are units, be that unit a service, be it a team, be it a full organization, like in the tangled layered network, the connections go in many different levels, and many different things can be units, just like systems are social constructs. Like, where do you draw the boundaries? Of finding the teams or the units that are saturated, or that don't have a large enough perspective on the system to know what they need to do next. One of the things that I've discovered in the last couple of years being a site reliability champion is if you can get the right people in the room and describe the problem the right way, it becomes easy. But it has to be all of the right people in the room, and the problem has to be framed in the right way. And when that happens, they can talk it through and go, aha, here's what we need to do. Let's go do it. And then it's clean enough and crisp enough. The managers go, oh yeah, let's prioritize that, and off we go. But even if one necessary team member from one service isn't there, that's one of the key contributing problems to whatever this problem is, then everyone starts going for workarounds, and they don't see it clearly enough, and they don't have the full context represented there. And so
Hmm.
like I'm outside of the reading at this point, but it's almost like you are creating a new unit, a new team in that conversation that does have the net, like all visibility is local. So create a new unit that's connected in a new way to the socio-technical system space. And then the problem is easily solved with those connections that you've put together.
Ooh.
One thing, and let's, if I can drift us a little in a dangerous direction, you know, we do a lot of work by a video call now, and I've noticed that, you know, if you get a small enough audience, there's a little conversation. It's like, how are you doing? Are you doing okay? You know, and this idea that with all our privilege, we might not be doing very well, and that becomes hard to answer because, you know, it's hard, you know, all the things we used to do that we don't, that we want to do again, and this, that, and the other. And I think that the news is very hard to process. My kids are grown, so we don't have to worry about keeping their lives going. But just my wife and I spend a lot of time talking about, they say that means for us, that means this, what can we expect to do? And trying to piece that together in a model that makes sense to us and that leaves us something to look forward to. So that's complex. And I think that, you know, in a incident analysis sort of way, there's a lot of people thinking, well, when we come out of this, we want to be a different world than we went into it. And that is, well, I'm sure you can go into Woods and Woods will say, well, this is blah, blah, blah. And of course it's like that, you know. Then we get the diversity thing is reared up, and yeah, you know, it is a time where we already agreed that the computers touch everything, and the computers have touched that in a not particularly positive way. But we, as people who understand systems and want to improve our interaction with systems, really do have an obligation, you know, in the coming months to dig into systems that really kind of outside of our turf. But as humans, they are.
Are you suggesting that those of us who are have had the ability to build up this cognition ability about large systems have a responsibility to apply that a little bit further than we have been?
Well, we certainly ought to vote, but
yeah, I want to draw this out.
I think that
there's something cool in there.
You know, what I find is that we have a lot of friends who kind of respond to the news in a, well, I wish it were this way, so I'm going to assume it is. And well, how can you just, you know, if you this and this, you know, and kind of piecing together a logical argument. Or logical is an argument that is whole. There's a wholeness to thought there that, you know, when you're trying to figure out the computer system, you know, in your retrospective, you really do have to look pretty far and wide. But I don't think that people who, you know, there's not a lot of that. So I think influencing your friends, influencing, you know,
so we can act locally.
Every day there's another complicated thing that we have to tease apart and figure out, well, what is our position on that?
Yeah, Amy, I think I like the way you put it. My hope for the software industry, for us having an impact on the world besides making computer games, is exactly this that we're just talking about. We do get used to working with systems that are incredibly complex, and we can't just wish them away.
Right.
We can temporarily draw the boundaries where we choose to and say, oh, my SLA is really good. It doesn't matter if my ISP goes down and the website's not accessible. We're faced with reality, and we can poke those systems, and we can change them, and we can build in that observability so that we don't have the dark spots. So unlike any other science, we can change these systems and learn from them so much faster, and get used to looking at them empirically. And can we apply, and then we can't help but apply that in real life, I hope.
And
yeah, I really like that. So we have this opportunity to bring some of these ideas like observability into these old, large systems that were designed before these concepts were really even solidified.
Just the
Right.
expectation of being able to figure something out,
Yeah.
or just that we can use that in software to do experiments that teach us about complexity.
There's a feeling that if you try to understand too much, you'll certainly make mistakes and there'll be unintended consequences. So let's take something really simple, like if I sell you this, will you buy it? You know, we'll convert everything to a trade monetized in dollars. And then if we're making money, we must be doing good. Well, that's foolish.
Yeah, and then if you have money, you must be good.
Yeah, but that's a fallback in so much of how we think. And, you know, and I've led my career that way. You know, when I left research, I said, well, where are the problems that have money associated with it? I'll make more money if I go solve those problems. And you know, 4 years of working in finance, I decided I didn't actually like those people.
But talking about feedback systems, right? Like that need to eat.
Yeah. For sure. Yeah.
It requires money to eat.
I said, well, look, I live in an economy, so I have to play by its rules largely. But the rules are flexible, and the incidents we're living through, and there's multiple, they're compounding, are preparing us to look a little deeper next time. And I think that's going to be an appropriate way to get better at what we do by looking a little larger and then bringing what we learn there back to the things that we can control, that we can poke on, and so
and vice versa. Like one of the amazing things in reading everything Woods and Cook and Holnagel et al. have written and researched, the speed at which the tech industry iterates is jaw-dropping compared to the British maritime regulations or the Dutch rail or the aviation industry. I mean, it takes from the moment something gets designed to when they put it into an aircraft to when it gets out and over the lifespan of the aircraft is in decades. And that's the lifespan that a lot of the complex systems out in the broader world operate in, whereas in technology these things just come up and go, and the rate of change of our complex systems, while aren't, you know, well, what's a boundary, but though the boundaries are smaller, it goes so fast. So we are learning so quickly what would take in weeks and months and years, what would take previously people decades and lifetimes and generations to be able to learn about how the systems work, which is a huge advantage.
It's an advantage as long as we can keep up with it.
Yep.
Well, we can keep up, and we can keep pulling our existing systems up with it, right? I think that's where America in particular is facing a lot of issues, is we just left a lot of tech debt sitting in our social systems, to put it.
It's a good way to put it.
And I mean, we still write laws every so often that have hard-coded values in them. Like the minimum wage is, I guess now the conversation is the minimum wage is $15. Is that?
Which is already a few years behind.
Yeah.
Yeah. But then what happens in another 30 years when minimum wage is still only $15? Rather than, this is hand wavy, come up with some index and tie it to that, and then change the index as we learn more, or something to make a more dynamic system that can change its shape along with the adaptations that the system is going to make, rather than assume that we are where we are right now. It's all a verb. I mean, the process is a verb. It's always in motion. So to assume that we know something right now and that it's going to be true for any amount of time is crazy. So we still—
There is a sense of inertia there, right? Like things that we've believed for a long time are harder to move.
Mm-hmm.
There's some degree of, naturally, there are systems that move at different paces.
Yep.
And nature changes more slowly than commerce. I think this is Stuart Brand. And that's okay in software. The customer-facing API changes more slowly than the pieces inside. And so our government has a bigger impact than any one particular website. So it's going to change more slowly, but it does change. I mean, sometimes it feels like it changes at a pace that is longer than my lifetime, but that's still change and I can still influence it.
Yeah, I told my kids that they better get good at cleaning up messes because we've left them a lot.
Yeah, I'm still struggling to teach my son that, but he's only 10.
Oh, all right. Yeah, I was thinking of the environment. You're thinking
Well,
of
I am too.
Lego blocks.
But we have to start small.
Yeah.
Well, cool. That brings us up. We've got a few minutes left. We have one question. I actually kind of like it, so I'm going to read it back. An observation that Reinhardt made. Very constructive education in platform work. We really highly value reuse, but that reuse is at the cost of a certain level of understanding of our systems. This kind of ties into what we were just talking about a little bit. And if a team builds a platform and team B uses it, wait, I didn't get that all the way. Let's just go back to that tie of constructivist education back to the way that we in software kind of get obsessed with reuse, right? Because I think there's a thread there that he was trying to point out, and I welcome Reinhardt to send me a little more.
And there's also a tension between something that is robust and something that's resilient. And as we go into reuse, I make a thing and then give it to y'all and then y'all use it. But wait, it's not quite the right thing for y'all, but I've written all of these tests and done all of this work in building it. So now it's not quite the perfect fit elsewhere. And the cost for anyone else using it to adapt it to their local conditions and constraints is that much harder. And so that's been another big aha that I've had, is just like I see software engineers building things with tons of tests, going for robustness for this one use case that I am certain this thing is perfectly built for. It will withstand anything that I can imagine today when I'm writing it at this time. But I'm not making it easy to adapt it to new context or to new things that I just haven't thought of yet. And so that's the trade-off between resilience and robustness. Robustness is, we're gonna make sure this will work in all of the conditions that we currently know about. But there's also thinking about, can we make this thing quick and easy to adapt, because it is going to need to adapt in the future. Yeah, because I don't know enough right now, and it's going to change really fast.
Eric Dobbs pointed out in the chat that the knowledge trade-off of if his team builds an internal platform, the people who use it don't understand the things that the platform is abstracting over.
Mm-hmm.
So you.
Oh yeah.
And as Tim just pointed out, the people implementing the platform, once you put it out in the wild and people start using it, you lose understanding of how it's being used because you're not directly connected to all of those people. well, there's a value there for the internal platform. You have some hope of connection to those, but as soon as it's public, you don't know what people are doing with it. So there's a loss of knowledge on both sides.
And there is an art, and I associate it with you know, language designers. You know, nobody wants a language designer that can only solve problems that they can imagine. You know, in language design, you try to figure out what thought process you want to support, and you know, I'm old enough that recursion was considered a graduate level problem because all the undergraduates learned Fortran, and Fortran doesn't support recursion, right? You know, and so now we deal with recursion. Now we know that, gee, if you allow arbitrary recursion, your system is going to fail because somebody's going to send you something that recurses you right out of memory, you know, and you know, so
Regular expressions.
yeah, to name one. Yeah. So there's a lot of you know, you're never really going to get away from the basics, but on a nice environment, you don't have to think about that continuously. You know, we said this a lot in object-oriented programming. We said, well, you don't worry about how the object do it. You just tell the object what you want done. And I finally, after writing some n-cubed algorithms, I said, well, that's true when you're reading the code. You shouldn't have to think about what the object that receives the message is going to do. But when you're writing the code, you really have to know what it has to do, because if you don't think about it, you're going to write crazy algorithms. You know, so there's at the level of author, you know, and this is like a poet that has to think of every possible meaning of a sentence, you know, to be able to write something.
But the politician.
Or a politician, you know.
I wish they would.
Well, okay.
Well, unfortunately, they're thinking about their buddies, I think, you know, but
by my standards.
Yeah.
Well, on that note, I want to thank you, everyone. This was wonderful. I really love how we got a little bit out of tech a little bit. That was wonderful.
Yeah.
Thank you all for coming. Nancy, do you have any notes before we close out?
Yeah, we just wanted to say thank you all so much again for the wonderful discussion and insights here. So we'll look forward to sharing the written format of all of these insights for you to take away. And please do check out blameless.com/events for all of our future panels and webinars. And just wanted to say a huge, huge thank you again to Jessica, Tim, and Ward. These are definitely such strange times, and really appreciate you being here to help foster sense of community as well. So we'll share this recording, and wanted to thank all of you once again. Take care and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, Amy and Nancy.
Take care.